All right, let's get right into it. To really understand the world today, you've got to wrap your head around the just massive scale of change that happened in the 20th century. I mean, it was a period of unbelievable expansion. But believe me, it was not a smooth ride. So first, just think about people, the human population. In only 100 years, it quadrupled. That's 4 times as many of us on the planet. I mean, that alone is a huge, huge shift. But then, get this, the world's economic output, all the stuff we make, the services, the value created, that multiplied by 40. Yeah, not 4 times, 40 times. That's a level of growth that is honestly hard to even imagine.
And that leads to the real question, right? This massive boom, fueled by these deeper and deeper global connections, well, it wasn't spread evenly, not even close. And that inequality is really the key to understanding why so much resistance started to pop up. Who actually benefited? Who got left behind? And why did it all spark such a major pushback?
So in this explainer, we're going to unpack that resistance. We'll start with the sheer scale of that change, then dive into the economic pushback that really boiled over in Seattle. After that, we'll look at the cultural side with China's digital firewall, and finally, we'll tie it all together to the balancing act we are still dealing with right now.
So yeah, that incredible 40 times expansion, it didn't just happen by accident. It was the result of a very deliberate, carefully designed global system. A system that, as we'll see, would eventually face a pretty powerful reckoning.
Okay, so let's get into our first front of resistance. To really get the economic backlash, we've got to go all the way back to the end of World War II, when world leaders basically tried to build a whole new economic order from the ground up.
So, in 1944, a bunch of delegates meet in a place called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And their goal was, well, incredibly ambitious, to stop the kind of economic disaster that led to the Great Depression and World War II. The cornerstones of their new system were 2 big institutions, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. The idea was to promote stability and keep money flowing freely.
Now, what's so interesting here is the huge gap between the promise and the reality that a lot of people experienced. On the one hand, the goals were totally noble: rebuild countries torn apart by war, lift people out of poverty. But over the next few decades, this really strong critique started to build, that the whole system was basically rigged to help the wealthy, industrialized nations, what we often call the global north, at the expense of developing countries, the global south. So, what were people actually saying? And where did that 40x explosion of wealth really end up? Well, critics argued that the system made it super easy for huge multinational corporations to find cheaper labor and weaker regulations in other countries. At the same time, the policies being pushed by the IMF and the World Bank could just steamroll a country's ability to make its own economic decisions. Many started calling it a new form of colonialism, one where you could extract value without ever having to plant a flag.
Now, this wasn't some overnight thing. For decades after 1944, all these resentments were just kind of simmering beneath the surface. And then, in 1999, all of that pent-up anger and frustration just exploded onto the world stage in a very, very public way.
So, in 1999, the World Trade Organization, sort of a successor to those Bretton Woods ideals, was planning a big meeting in Seattle. They probably expected business as usual. Instead, they were met by over 40,000 protesters who completely shut the city down. And what's amazing is who showed up. It wasn't just one group with one complaint. No, you had labor unions marching right next to environmentalists, human rights advocates standing with student activists, people who were worried about their jobs, about corporate power, about the planet. They all found a common enemy.
The battle for Seattle was a total game changer. It showed the world that resistance to the economic side of globalization wasn't just some fringe idea. It was a powerful, diverse, and organized force that you just couldn't ignore anymore. But look, globalization isn't just about money and shipping containers. There's a whole other side to it, the cultural side. And that has seen its own intense pushback, often driven by the very same tech that was supposed to bring us all closer together. So in the 21st century, platforms like Facebook and Twitter became this new engine of globalization, right? They let ideas, music, trends, you name it, spread faster and wider than ever before in human history, connecting people in ways we'd never seen.
But not everyone was celebrating. Some governments looked at this flood of unfiltered information and didn't see connection. They saw a kind of cultural invasion, a direct threat to their social stability, and a potential tool for the kinds of popular uprisings they had seen topple governments in other parts of the world.
And China is the perfect case study for this. In 2009, after some really serious ethnic riots in a city called Urumqi, the government pointed the finger straight at Western social media.
They claimed platforms like Facebook and Twitter had fanned the flames of the unrest. And that became the justification for doing something pretty drastic, blocking them entirely.
But here's the clever part. China didn't get rid of social media. They knew people wanted it. So instead, they blocked the foreign platforms and nurtured their own homegrown alternative, Weibo. It looks and feels a lot like Twitter, but there's one massive difference.
And this is the core of their entire strategy. Weibo operates under intense government monitoring and censorship, so it gives people the form of social media. You can still share things, you can connect, but it gives the state total control over the substance. It's a crystal clear pushback against the free flow of global culture, basically creating a walled-off, highly curated version of the internet.
So what we have are these two big streams of resistance, right? One is economic, the other is cultural. Now let's pull it all together and see why these stories from the past are so critical for understanding the arguments that are happening all around us today.
This table lays it out pretty clearly. On one side, you've got the economic front. The driver was that whole post-war system, and the main concern was about inequality and exploitation. The classic example, the battle for Seattle. Then, on the other side, you have the cultural front. The driver there was social media, and the concern was about unwelcome foreign influence and instability. The perfect example of that is China's Great Firewall. They're different, but they're both reactions to huge global forces hitting local realities.
And this, right here, is why all of this matters so much. These fights from yesterday are the very roots of our biggest debates today. I mean, when we argue about new trade deals, or the incredible power that big tech companies have, or when we talk about fears of cultural influence, we are having the exact same conversations that blew up in Seattle and that were built into the Great Firewall.
Which I guess leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? As our world gets more and more connected every single day, the core challenge is still the same. How do we get all the amazing benefits of globalization while also taking seriously and actually doing something about the very real concerns about fairness, about inequality, and about local identity that have been fueling this resistance for more than a century? That is the balancing act we all have to figure out.